Welcome to Sababush, the podcast of Milk and Honey. I'm your host, Jake Gillis. Join me in learning about Israeli culture from its movers and shakers. Connect with the Israel you love, or soon will. Welcome back to Sababush, the podcast of Milk and Honey. Before we jump in, a quick favor. We put together a short listener survey to help shape the future of Sababush. It takes just a few minutes, and your feedback means a lot. Who do you want to hear next? What's working? What's not? You can find the link in the show notes or at sababush.com. Toda rabba. Now, back to the episode. Welcome back to Sababush, the podcast of Milk and Honey. In this episode, we explore the rich and often overlooked middle ground of Jewish life in Israel, beyond the binary of Haredi and secular. Our guest, Rabbi Noga Brenner Samia, offers a deep and nuanced look at pluralism in Israeli society, where many are forging meaningful Jewish identities outside traditional categories. As the executive director of Hillel Israel and a leading voice within the pluralist space, Rabbi Brenner Samia sheds light on how different movements are growing, creating vibrant, inclusive communities rooted in Jewish values and egalitarianism. She also discusses Hillel Israel's role in empowering college students to explore Jewish life on their own terms, fostering curiosity, community, and a strong sense of belonging. Together, we examine what it means to live a Jewish life in Israel today, the evolving role of non-Orthodox movements, and why expanding the definition of Jewish identity is vital to the country's future. Rabbi Brenner Samia, thanks so much for coming on Sababush. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's really a pleasure. I'm really excited for this episode on pluralism and to learn more about the I don't want to reduce non-Orthodox movements to non-Orthodox, but I think people tend to see in Israel the Haredi community, the secular community, maybe sometimes the Dati Leumi community, but maybe people abroad aren't as aware of the other movements, like the Reform movement, the Masorti movement. And having you here to shed some light is a great privilege. So if we could just start off by hearing about your Jewish journey, and then also through those years, how the Reform community has developed in Israel.
So thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I will full disclosure, I'm not a Reform rabbi. My father is, still 89 years old, going strong, has been a very committed member of the Reform movement in the United States. He himself lived for several years in Israel, but his rabbinical career was in America. So I'm happy. So as we say, some of my best friends are Reform Jews, and I'm very familiar with the movement here in Israel. Very supportive, of course, but I myself am a graduate of the Hartman and Oranim rabbinic program, the Bet Midrash LeRabbanut Israelit, the Israeli rabbi program, which I'll talk a little bit about. Yeah, tell me where you want to get started in this. There's a lot to talk about. I could say about my own journey you asked about. So I was born in Israel. My parents are Olim, were Olim from the United States. Most of my growing up was in Netanya, a little bit in New York, back and forth. And I guess because of this kind of straddling both worlds, America, Israel, seeing Jewish life here in Israel develop, Jewish life in America, very connected, having family here and family there, I've always been bilingual, bicultural. I say sometimes bi-Jewish because Judaism there and Judaism here, and again, trying to straddle both worlds. I guess what defines me most, I guess I'd say today, is me being a bridge builder between Jewish life in America and Jewish life here, very much trying to draw inspiration from the diversity of Jewish life that I encounter all around the world and to bring it here into Israeli society. That's been a lot of what has driven me in my personal life and in my professional career. So I've always been a little bit of a seeker. In America, when I lived there, my 3 kids were born in America, so we lived there as adults. I never quite found my Jewish home because I was always too Israeli. And then in Israel, I was also a seeker, never fully connected to any one movement or shul here because I was maybe in the Reform movement back in the day. It was a lot more Anglo, and I was looking for an Israeli approach. But I was always much more liberal and progressive than the typical Israeli and Israeli community you'd meet. So I guess what's defined me most is that I've been a seeker. And I think that's also what's driven me to be connected and try to advance the world of Jewish pluralism here in Israel, and also to try to be creative in that field.
We have a lot of jumping off points from there. I'm wondering about the last point. How would you define pluralism? Different people could represent a wide range of different Jewish thoughts and perspectives, but how do you see pluralism?
So I'll do it maybe with a compare and contrast to how it plays out in the United States, which is what I'm familiar with, and perhaps some of the listeners as well. We always say about Hillel, I'm the CEO of Hillel Israel, which is the Israeli arm of the Hillel International Movement. And in the United States, when we talk about pluralism, in the United States, pluralism is almost second nature. It's obvious that a Hillel, if it has many different kinds of Jews, is going to have many different kinds of opportunities for those Jews to celebrate their Judaism. And it's really just about convening, we say the round table, to have all sorts of Jews around the table. And that's the diversity of Jewish life that they're trying to create. That's pluralism. In Israel, it doesn't work quite the same way. In Israel, we actually have to work at Jewish pluralism. It's not just enough to convene everyone around the table. If you do that, you're going to be missing some serious voices. And typically, they're going to be the liberal and more progressive Jewish voices. So in Israel, and this we do at Hillel, it's about actively elevating voices that are not often heard, and then convening that round table, if you will, to giving everyone a space at that table. So the work is a little bit different when it comes to pluralism here and plural. What I'll say also is, I guess my definition of Jewish pluralism, right? It's not just about being tolerant of other opinions and approaches. We talk a lot about the difference between pluralism and sovlanut, right? Pluralism and tolerance. I don't just tolerate other views that I think are wrong. I actually celebrate the diversity of Jewish voices because I have an inherent interest in there being that diversity and that pluralism, as we said, around the table. So a pluralist, just to make it clear, though, for our listeners, being a pluralist doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. It doesn't mean you don't have a strong opinion that you're often even willing to go fight for and go to battle for and even pay a price for and try to convince others that you have your path and your path is the right one. But I think it's more of an understanding that your path might be the right one for you and there are other paths that are right for others. Your path might be the right one for you now, and it might look differently and change over time. So it's much more about how we treat others with other opinions. It's not, you say one person can't be a pluralist because one person represents their opinions only, but it's about the collectiveness, about believing in creating a collective of Jewish voices that together represent pluralism. And I like at Hillel, what I like to teach, of course, a classic Jewish text about the arguments between Hillel and Shammai. Of course, it's the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And you might be familiar with this one in Masechet Eruvin, where they're arguing and a voice comes from the heaven and says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. These are the voices of the living God, and these are also the voices of the living God, which kind of is a nice way of saying pluralism, right? All of us represent voices of the living God, and so we all should be equally respected and heard. The beautiful part, though, of course, is the next line is say, but still the halacha, sometimes we have to decide. We can't have everything goes. Being a pluralist doesn't mean everything goes. By the way, pluralism has its boundaries, and we could talk about that. They're tricky and they're difficult sometimes to define, but there certainly are boundaries to Jewish pluralism. But the next line is, how is the halacha decided? The halacha goes by Beit Hillel. because they were modest. And they not only heard and respected the words of Shammai, they actually put the words of Shammai, the opinions of Shammai, even before their own, in representing a case on a sugya, on whatever issue it was. So it's not to say that they agreed with Beit Shammai. If they had agreed with Beit Shammai, we wouldn't have had the conflict to begin with. But it's to say that they put the respect of the other voice, the respect of the, even if it's the minority voice, the respect of the person that represents that voice is above the conflict. And that's what I think pluralism really is about.
And do you think that in terms of the state of pluralism, like the State of the Union, but the state of pluralism in Israel, over the course of your career, are we in a better place? Is there a more positive view of pluralism? Is there more of an active lifting up of pluralism?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, of course, it's complicated, as we let rabbis to say. But the short answer is yes, as in we are seeing more and more, for example, more and more couples seeking to get married outside of the rabbanut, so they're outside of the chief rabbinate, so they're seeking other options. We're seeing more and more bar bat mitzvahs happening at Reform and conservative shuls and synagogues. We're seeing data from the Reform movement actually shows that there is an increase in affiliation with the Reform movement. There's certainly an increase in support of the Reform movement, a little bit like the classic, what we always had, the shul I don't go to is the Orthodox shul. We like to say that in Israel. A little bit, it's more and more the shul I don't go to might actually be a liberal shul as well. So we're seeing more of that. Have we reached the tipping point? No. Is it mainstream Jewish Israeli culture? No. But I think we have developed over the years. I'm proud to say this, and I actually feel part of moving this along, is developed a field of Israeli Judaism. That's what we're calling it now. Pluralism, by the way, some say it's overused or even abused, that word. I still use it. I think it's still powerful and important. But I do also use often the term we're using now more and more is Israeli Judaism. And I think the field is developing and more players are coming in. By the way, players from the Orthodox as well as the secular, as well as Reform and conservative and everything in between. And we're seeing the field develop. I gave the example of my rabbinic program that I'm proud to be a graduate of, which is developing the leadership in this field. This is a group of rabbis that give reshut zo lazo. We give smicha to one another. It's an independent smicha program, and it's welcoming of all denominations and also those that are unaffiliated with denominations, and to say we need to build this field together. And how do we build Jewish leadership that is collectively working as a field? So I think we're seeing the leadership develop, we're seeing Jewish practice develop, and we're seeing more and more Israelis partake or affirm, might be a word that I might use.
Now, and really not to get into politics very much, but there was an event in the Knesset not too long ago where a Knesset member very not nicely said to Rabbi Gilad Kariv, also a Knesset member, he was talking about his daughters putting on tefillin. And there was some more said between them, but one part was that Knesset member who said the not very nice thing said, basically, the Jews will continue now, effectively putting Rabbi Kariv outside of that. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do Israelis look at people of different views, people who aren't Haredi, people who maybe are part of this emerging Israeli Judaism where people are affirming different aspects of Judaism? What did that bring up for you?
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the ignorance and misconceptions about liberal Judaism or Judaism outside the Orthodox movements. And I think they're very real. One of the biggest ones I'd say is that many Israelis, even if they don't define themselves as Orthodox, they are Orthodox in their thinking. They feel that the right way of doing Jewish is the Orthodox way. Now, that's being said, recognizing that even Orthodox Judaism and ultra-Orthodox Judaism, there's a diversity there as well. I'm not to say that's homogeneous either. But for the sake of our conversation, maybe I'll use that term, there's a sense that the Orthodox way is the right way. I might not partake in it, but if I were to do that, then that's the way to do it. And that change, or I'd say maybe the biggest misperception is that what's preserved Judaism over history has been the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox way. And I might not partake in it, but I'm grateful that there are Orthodox Jews, that they preserve the real way of being Jewish. And so when it comes to changing Judaism, they're afraid because that might, erode that ability to preserve ourselves, the slippery slope. If we make changes, there'll be more changes and we'll lose ourselves. And then it's assimilation and it's losing our Jewish identity. And Israelis, even if they are secular, they're very Jewish. We care a lot about our Jewish identity. There's a lot of Judaism going on around here, even if there's a lot also of conflict around Jewish identities. And I think there's a lot of educational work that needs to be done here, and that's the uphill battle, and that's the going against the stream, because the educational work in Israel being done is actually going against this in a lot of ways. But I would argue exactly the opposite. Hafuch, as we would say in Hebrew, hafuch, gute hafuch. It's not the rigidity of the Orthodox movements that's preserved Israel. It's actually our ability to adapt as a people. It's been our flexibility over history and our ability to change and incorporate changes. That's what's kept the Jewish people alive. And if going back to the Gilad Karif story in the Knesset, first of all, I'm a big fan and a friend. I think Gilad is doing amazing work in the political arena as well as in the Jewish arena. And we need more voices like him, and we need to strengthen him, and we need to encourage him to do everything we can to do. I think sometimes events like that in the Knesset actually maybe even help our cause, because there's so much antagonism towards the government right now on so many issues that this is just one more, that actually maybe it will even create a positive sentiment in Israeli society towards Jews outside of the Orthodox community. It certainly makes me want to work harder, and it also makes me sad. I'll share one thing. I often teach groups of students that are mixed, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, and the question I get from the Orthodox often is, but wait a minute, if you're not going to be halachically observant, you're not going to be part of the Orthodox community, then what's the point? Why are you doing what you do? Why do you care? Why do you teach Judaism? Why do you study Judaism? And I find that to be the saddest response, actually, to what we're doing, because it just speaks to, there's so much ignorance that means also in the Orthodox community as to Jewish culture. There's so much to Judaism that's beyond halakha. That's what I'm trying to elevate. Jewish culture and Jewish values and tikkun olam, and how to use Judaism or find within Judaism purpose, and how to be better people and a better society and do good deeds and have formed community and spirituality and all these beautiful things that we have within our own heritage, that I often find it sad if we reduce it just to a discussion about halakha and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And often the conversations I get with students is, but I keep Shabbat, or I keep kosher, or I don't keep kosher, or I don't. It comes down to that. It's a reduction of Judaism, and I really fight hard on that one, that we need to elevate Judaism. Judaism is not a religion, as our educator Avram Infeld, who's a former Hillel professional and today a board member of mine, has been on many a stage to say Judaism is not a religion, or maybe Judaism is not only a religion. It's much more than that, and it's up to us, la'afoch ve'la'afoch ba, yes, to delve into it and turn it over and over and to find meaning in it for us.
It's incredibly beautiful. We're a people, we're a culture, we're so many things more. So the fact that you day in and day out get to engage with these questions and spreading that is very much holy work. I'm wondering also, in terms of, in Israel, there's a lot of people feeling Israeli. There's a lot of nationalism. And there isn't necessarily, from a lot of non-religious people, a feeling of being Jewish, because it's reduced to being a religion. So I'm wondering, with your work with Hillel Israel, what exactly are those conversations? I imagine, in contrast with Hillel's around North America, it's not necessarily someone coming from a small town and they've never done a Seder before, because that's statistically a lot of Israelis have done a Seder. So have you come across a big difference in what its mission is and how it's, at least in America, there was the saying for Hillel, Jews doing Jewish with other Jews. Is that a piece of Hillel Israel's work?
Thanks for the question. It gives me an opportunity to talk about Hillel Israel. I'd say yes, and no. Our context, as you say, is very different. So for us, it's not enough to be Jewish home for Jews on campus doing Jewish with other Jews. It's much more about what kind of Judaism. And this gets back to the beginning of our conversation, right? What kind of Jewish life do we want to create on campus, off campus, in our own homes, in our families? It's much more a discussion around that. The motto of Hillel's around the world is to create among students, an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, and abroad it would be the love of Israel. And here we take that motto and we uphold it, and this is where we intersect with the movement, of course, and it's about creating an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, but we say to the Jewish people, because we're much more expansive, and that's become part of our mission, or rather it's always been part of our mission, is the Jewish peoplehood aspect of this. And this gets to how we talk about Judaism on campus. We often use the peoplehood lens. I sometimes call it, we raise a flag on campus. One side of the flag is pluralism. We talked about that. The other side is peoplehood. And these two it's one flag, and they're very much interconnected because, and when I say peoplehood, I'll explain that. It's the sense of being part of a Jewish people that's not just in one location, it's rather around the world. For Israel, it's super important for us to have that consciousness because Israel is not just a home for the people who live in Israel, it's a home for Jews around the world. And we want to be part of creating that home that Jews around the world feel comfortable here and feel that this is their home. And part of that is they have to feel comfortable with the Judaism that they encounter in Israel. So upholding a pluralism of Jewish voices is really important for Israeli Jews. But it's also important, I believe, for Jews around the world, for them to have this home that they work so hard in creating connections between United States, America, or rather Jews around the world, and Israel. But if they don't have the other side of this relationship, then to what kind of Judaism can they connect to here? Yes, the work we do on Israeli Judaism here is to serve Israelis, which I believe is super important, but it's also serving the world in the way that I explained. We talk about the connection between peoplehood and pluralism to the extent that Israeli Jews are more open-minded to different ways of doing Jewish. That's the extent they're going to be more welcoming to Jews around the world, and vice versa. The more we encounter different Judaisms from outside Israel and are more accepting and more understanding and more familiar, that's the extent where we can bring that into Jewish life here in Israel and create a pluralism here in Israel. I often talk about the mifgash, the encounter between Israelis and Jews around the world. The mifgash is so important because if we talk about the Jewish people and connectivity among Jews around the world, that's the resilience of our people is based on us staying connected, right? Mutual responsibility, right? We care about Jews around the world. That's what's kept us going over the years. And we need to work on that care and continue to care. I certainly say that for Israelis who often are ignorant and often don't understand why it's important that we have connections and care about Jews around the world. But I say this mifgash that we're trying to create, it's a goal, but it's also a means. It's a goal because of what I said. The Jewish people staying connected is important in and of itself. But it's also a means by connecting to Jews around the world, we're starting a conversation. For the Americans, by coming to Israel and meeting Israelis, they're starting a conversation about Jewish life in America and American Jewish identity. And for us too, for the Israelis meeting a Jew from outside Israel, it starts a conversation here. It's a catalyst, I often call it, for exploring more deeply, more nuanced, more rich Jewish identity here in Israel. We always say, if we could only bring, just like there's taglit for Jews, or American Jews, I think, mainly, to come to Israel and experience Israel. And that is really a jumpstart sometimes, or it keeps American Jews connected to Jewish identity even when they go back to America. I wish we could do a reverse birthright and have Israelis go and experience Jewish life outside of Israel. It's so eye-opening. It's so heart-opening, right? They see beauty of being Jewish around the world and so many more options. And we often have the cliche when an Israeli goes to America, they go Israeli and they come back Jewish, assuming they have a meaningful Jewish experience there. And they often say to me, why don't we have this kind of beautiful Judaism in Israel? And I say to them, well, we do. You just have to seek it out. You have to find it. It's not always easy to find outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the Jerusalem bubble. But so the peoplehood discussion is so important. So we can't bring all the Israelis over to go to BJ or Romimu or Central. I'm just naming a few synagogues in New York that I'm familiar with. But we can, and this is what we try to do on campus, is to give Israelis a little taste of other ways of being Jewish, and to continue that conversation with the Israelis after the Mifgash, in the hope that they spark their curiosity and their motivation and their interest in exploring different ways of being Jewish. The organization's been around for over 70 years, started in Jerusalem, but we've expanded over the years to other colleges and higher educational institutions. So our main campus is still at Hebrew University, Har HaTzofim, the Mount Scopus campus. So if you're ever in the area, please come and look us up. But we have now a center at Tel Aviv University, Ben Gurion University, Haifa University that works with the Technion and Gordon College, of course. And we are also operational at two colleges, one up north, the Tel Chai Academic College, which is right outside of Kiryat Shmona, and the Sapir Academic College, which is right outside Sderot. Now, those two areas are so important for us to be working there. Those colleges have been hit very hard during the war and after, and since October 7th, been relocations and dislocations and reserve duty, and it's been a very complicated campus situation, but we're hoping to renew our activities at both campuses this coming year, where we reach thousands of Israeli students every year that are really seeking community. They're seeking an opportunity to explore their identity. I always say this is the perfect time for Israelis. They're a little bit older than their American counterparts in college, right? They're usually after the army. So they're really serious about their professional identities, sometimes their gender, their sexual identities, their family life. And so I always say this is also the perfect time to take a moment to also explore your Jewish identity. And that's what we're trying to be for students, and also to put them on a path for after they graduate college, to find their way into Jewish life. So we try, if at Ben Gurion, which is one of our most largest Hillel centers that really engages many students in the Beersheba region, we expose them also to Jewish life in Beersheba, so that they have an in there, but they're also, even if they find themselves in another city after graduation, they have access to other kinds of Jewish communities that they might seek out for themselves and for their families.
Would you say that, and it's funny that if an Israeli goes to North America and they, on the side, teach Hebrew at a Jewish day school and they send their kids to Jewish day school, I've definitely heard over the years people going Israeli and coming back Jewish. There's a word, kiruv, which usually is talking more about Orthodox or Orthodox programs that are trying to make people more religious. And Hillel in North America and around the world isn't really a kiruv program, but how do you encourage Jewish activity or Jewish engagement without saying, of course it's not coercive, but encouraging people to engage with Judaism without saying that you have to do this or you should, or just because you mentioned earlier those conversations coming from right. Orthodox students asking about halacha.
Here's where I think the Israeli Judaism movement, if I could call it that, the field has really developed an expertise in doing exactly that. We often use text, Jewish text, ancient, modern, often a combination, right? From the Jewish bookshelf, we like to call it, in order to draw Israelis into this conversation and in order to open up different viewpoints. It's a technique, a methodology, I think, that's been developed over the years. We call it Batei Midrash Pluralistim, which are pluralistic Beit Midrash or learning programs. So the conversation is around a text, and a text can be interpreted in so many ways. And I think the educators that I work with, my staff, facilitators of these kinds of learning programs have that ability, is to open up a dialogue, yes, to delineate boundaries to this conversation, but to really allow for a richness of different voices. We're not about being dogmatic. It's not about coming out with a bottom line. the facilitator might have their own drop the mic moment where they have their opinion or their agenda, and that's perfectly, but that's one of, right, the circle. And I think that's really where the secret sauce. And you're right, it's not easy, because I think it's easier to be dogmatic. It's easier to have all your opinions very well defined, and sometimes the black and white is something very appealing, especially to younger people that are looking for answers. But we work at this. We work at making these conversations rich and diverse. And I believe if you come at it with an authentically, and you make it relevant and personal and community-based, people find other, either different or like-minded people in the group, I think it's very powerful, transformative experience. That's what we're going for. It's not easy also because, especially outside the Orthodox community, Israelis don't often see the importance of doing this kind of work, I'd call it. That's where actually the engagement with Jews outside of Israel comes in, also plays another role. It's appealing to young Israelis. They get to meet Jews outside of Israel. They get to make friends from other countries. So it becomes also a draw, if you will. Yeah, I think, did I answer the question? I think I did. What I'll also say is that Israelis ultimately are very Jewish. You mentioned, even if without thinking about it, they do Pesach Seders. Most Israelis are going to do Pesach Seders. Most do something on Yom Kippur, or they change. Obviously, they change their routine on Yom Kippur because the country is stalled everywhere on Yom Kippur and other Jewish holidays. So Israelis, and they actually really do care about their Jewish identity. They just have not been really taught to think creatively about it. They've stuck in this dichotomy that we talked about earlier, about this dati chiloni, this Orthodox or non-Orthodox kind of paradigm. And I think that's really where the field of Israeli Judaism, its role is to break down that paradigm or that dichotomy. Being Jewish does not equal, right, if you imagine that equal with a line on it, does not equal religious, does not equal Orthodox. There's many different paths to that graph, to that equation. But ultimately, I believe in Israel, whoever is going to control the Jewish discourse will really control the political, the social, the cultural discourse as well. And that's why we really need to work hard at part of this Jewish discussion in Israel. And I'll say it from the perspective of Judaism and democracy, right? If we talk about it, the future of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and the and in the middle, or the little dash, if you will, between the Jewish democratic, when we talk about Israel, it is super important. And it's how do we strengthen that little dash, that little connector, or that little and I believe that dash runs through pluralism. Because you can't really have Judaism that in harmony with liberal democratic values if you don't uphold pluralism. It's the only way. Now, pluralism, again, doesn't mean you don't have Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox voices and approaches, of course, within it. And they're perfectly valid, just like any other voice. But you certainly need the diversity if you're going to be able to marry that with democracy. And I certainly don't see any way future or forward in this country without having both sides of that equation really strong. I think there's been a lot of talk in Israel, certainly before the war, during the time of the judicial reform here in Israel, about how to strengthen democracy. But we need to be just as vigilant about how to strengthen Judaism. And when I say strengthen, diversify.
It's surprising. It's almost not Israeli, but usually in Israel, the startup nation, if someone isn't happy with the technology, there's so much innovation and they really dig into it. They find other ways to make it more interesting. But it sounds like over the years, for a lot of Israelis, it's been, okay, Orthodox practice doesn't really speak to me. I won't necessarily engage with it. There will be pieces of Jewish activity, but it's just for years, it was just left at that. So to hear that, like maybe this is an inflection point or something where there's more room for pluralism and people are more into it and engaging with it, that sounds more like innovative and Israeli.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. You still, though, see two sides of the reaction, reactivity to the ultra-Orthodox, the increase of the strength of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel and the stronghold they have on Judaism in Israel, but also in politics, in our government in Israel. And there's a strong reaction to that. It's often even increasing the antagonism towards anything Jewish, or it could play out the other way. We're increasing antagonism towards that kind of Jewish. Let's seek another kind of Jewish. And that's the kind of the side of, obviously, that we're trying to encourage and increase. But we are seeing a lot of young Jews that are checking out and saying, if that's Judaism, then I want nothing to do with it. And that's really the sad, tragic part of Jewish life in Israel. And I do believe that it will change. I see, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation, I see change already happening. And I see more and more people coming into the field trying to do the work of change. So I am optimistic.
Certainly a hopeful note to end on and to go into a lightning round. A couple of who is your favorite Israeli singer, what's your favorite restaurant in Israel, things like that. So I'll offer you a few. You don't have to fire them off. It can take a little time. We'll start with your favorite Jewish book written by an Israeli, or one that you've enjoyed recently.
So there are lots, of course, that I could go to. I'll speak of one that has just recently crossed my desk. It's called Hatikva by Uri Ashi, and it is a very authentic, real attempt to address the Israel-Palestinian conflict from a place that everyone could understand. I truly believe that this topic has to be put back on the table. We need to be talking about it. Not saying we know right now what the solution is to the conflict, but we certainly can't be ignoring it. We see after October 7th that we definitely need to be engaging with it. And Hatikva Shel Uri Ashi is a good place to start.
Give that a look. Favorite Israeli singer or band?
First one comes to mind for me would be Dan Reichel. A new one that I've been into lately is a guy named Mike Rouse. If you don't know him, go look him up. He's great. And I love, in Israel, there's now like this spiritual music scene. It certainly overseas would be called a Jewish music scene. I necessarily use that word here because it incorporates a lot of Jewish music, but it doesn't necessarily define itself as such. But folks like Orka and Uri Atzur that are doing beautiful soul music, sometimes using words from the Tfilot, and sometimes other languages as well. But there's a beautiful spiritual music scene going on in Israel. They are among them.
It's always exciting to hear about new music, new artists. I didn't know there was such a soul movement and spiritual movement in music. Favorite restaurant in Israel? It can be local here in Jerusalem. It can be Netanya, anywhere.
So I'm not a Jerusalemite. I live in Tel Mond, which is closer to Tel Aviv. But I still would say in Tel Mond, we have a little teeny tiny hummus shop. It's called Yerushalmi. And every Friday, either myself or one of my kids goes over and we pick up a kilo and we bring it home for Friday lunch. And it's probably the best hummus in Israel. If you happen to find yourself in Tel Mond, which is in the Sharon area, not far from Netanya, come on into the Yerushalmi hummus. It's my plug.
It's so fun to hear how, yes, hummus is Israeli, but the whole idea of the hummus joint, or whether it's small, sort of hole-in-the-wall type vibe.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you came here and shared with us about pluralism in Israel.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for a thoughtful and inspiring conversation with Rabbi Noga Brenner Samia, topic of pluralism in Israel. We explore the evolving landscape of Jewish identity, the challenges and opportunities of religious diversity, and the importance of inclusive dialogue in shaping a shared Israeli future. Next time on Sababush, we'll be joined by journalist and linguist Ilan Gilad for a fascinating deep dive into Hebrew, history, and how language shapes identity. From biblical roots to modern slang, we'll explore how Hebrew has evolved and what it tells us about Israeli culture today. Stay connected with us on social media. Be sure to follow Sababush on your podcast listening platform to get the latest episodes. And don't forget to visit our website, sababush.com, and subscribe to the Sababush Substack, where we publish articles on all aspects of Israeli culture. There are currently more than 50 articles ranging from Eurovision to the slang term Sachi. I would also like to ask you to rate Sababush on your podcast platform of choice. Whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or another, ratings really do help us extend our reach. Thank you again for taking the time to listen, and I hope that you'll continue to do. We have some really exciting guests lined up. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out with comments and ideas to jake@sababush.com. Who would you like to see as a guest?